The Duke of Ravenshaw returned to England on a morning so pale and windless that even the waves of the Channel seemed to hold their breath. His carriage rolled across the familiar hills of Kent with a silence that matched the man inside it. Adrian Hawthorne, 32, decorated for bravery, feared for his restraint, admired for his discipline, carried the air of someone who had left more of himself abroad than he had brought home. His gloved hands rested on his knees, motionless save for the faint, unconscious twitch of a muscle near his thumb, one of the few remaining betrayals of a man who had spent too long commanding others to hide everything. They said he had returned cold as ice, and perhaps it was true. The war had emptied him, hollowed him, shaped him into something made of marble and duty. He spoke little, slept even less, and if he felt anything at all upon seeing the shores of England rise in the mist, he did not allow it the courtesy of a name. Ravenshaw Manor rose before him like a memory he did not fully trust. Its stone walls, ivy climbing along the arches, windows tall and dignified. Everything was as he had left it, and yet he felt none of the warmth a man was supposed to feel when returning home. He had no wife running down the steps to greet him, no children waiting to climb into his arms, no mother to embrace him. He had only the butler, standing straight-backed, prepared, loyal. The Duke stepped down, nodded once, and walked past him before the man could speak. Inside, the world was exactly as he had commanded it years before. The staff moved like quiet shadows. His boots echoed on the marble floors, but he felt it immediately, the absence of something he could not name. For years, in moments of exhaustion, he had imagined that returning home would feel like stepping into a warm bath after long, cold days. Instead, he felt only more cold, more distance, an ache he refused to acknowledge. His father had died while he was abroad. The title had passed to him through a letter so formal it could have been addressed to a stranger. His mother had followed shortly after. A soldier learned early that life rarely paused for grief. But something in him had shifted in those months of silence, something that made him regard the manor not as a home but as an inherited duty. He dismissed everyone by early afternoon and rode alone to the village. The countryside was quiet after the storm that had passed the night before. Puddles glistened. Between the horses' hooves, the sky still heavy and grey. His cloak flapped behind him as he approached the market square, a place he had once visited in the careless days of youth, before he had gone to war, before everything had changed. He intended only to observe from a distance, to remind himself of the land he now ruled, but something caught his attention. A figure at the far end of the square, near the bookstall. A woman, her posture straight but gentle, her hair tied in a loose knot, her dress of soft blue that seemed to glow despite the dull sky. He saw only her profile, yet something in the curve of her cheek, the grace of her hands as she turned a page, struck him violently. He knew that silhouette. He knew it with a force that emptied the breath from his lungs. Evelyn Ashbourne. He had not seen her in 5 years, not since the night before he left for the front, when he had said something unforgivable, something wrapped in pride, something he had pretended for years he had forgotten. She had looked at him with hurt in her eyes, though she had hidden it with grace the way all well-bred ladies were trained to do. He had walked away from her expecting that time would erase everything. Her kindness, her laughter, the way her presence softened the edges of the world. But time had not erased it. Not even war had erased it. He dismounted quietly, drawn to her, as if against his will. A duke did not approach a woman in a marketplace without causing whispers, yet he felt the world narrowing until there was only his breath and the space between them. She had changed, older, more composed, a whisper of melancholy on her features, but she was unmistakably Evelyn. She closed the book gently, thanked the bookseller, and turned to leave, and that was when he saw it, her left hand, bare, no ring. His chest tightened. His mind, trained to remain still under cannon fire, reacted with a jolt of something dangerously close to hope. She had been engaged once, not long after he left, to a gentleman of good reputation. He had heard the news from a letter forwarded to the barracks. He had not allowed himself to think of it. Now, seeing her hand unadorned, something old and burning stirred inside him. Possessiveness, longing, guilt, disbelief. But Evelyn did not see him. Not yet. She moved through the bustling square with an elegance that made it difficult for him to breathe. He stepped toward her, but a passing carriage forced him to halt. When it finally cleared, she was fewer than 20 steps away. He said her name before he realized the sound had escaped him. Evelyn. She stopped, her breath catching in her throat. He saw her back stiffen, saw her fingers curl slightly against her skirt. The slightest, smallest movement, but to a man who had spent years reading fear and resolve in soldiers' trembling hands, it was a revelation. Slowly she turned. Her eyes met his with a shock that rippled through her entire body. She was not the sort of woman easily surprised, yet her composure wavered for a fraction of a second, long enough to reveal that she had not prepared herself for the possibility of his return. Her lips parted slightly, and he felt something inside him crack, quietly, dangerously. "Your Grace," she said, her voice soft, polite, completely unlike the warmth with which she had once spoken his name. Adrian felt the title like a slap. He had never cared for it, had once told her so in a moment of unusual vulnerability. But now, she used it to place a wall between them, as neatly and gently as shutting a door. "I did not know you were back," she added. "I arrived this morning," he replied. The words felt stiff, foreign, as if he had forgotten how to speak in her presence. There was a silence between them, unbearable, suffocating, filled with all the words they had left unsaid 5 years before. The marketplace noise faded, replaced by the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. She looked older, wiser, but still the same. The girl he had once cared for more than he had ever dared to admit. His eyes lowered again to her bare hand. "You are no longer engaged," he said, before he could stop himself. Her expression changed, subtly, painfully. "No, I am not." She did not elaborate. She did not offer him the courtesy of explanation. And that restraint, her ability to withhold, to remain untouched by his question, stabbed him with something he refused to name. "May I congratulate you," she said carefully, "on your safe return." "It was not a matter of safety," he murmured. It was the closest thing to honesty he had spoken in months. She heard the hollow tone beneath it. Her eyes softened, just a fraction, but she tilted her head slightly, a gesture of distance. "I hope," she said quietly, "that England will be kinder to you than the war was." He stiffened. Her gentleness, offered so naturally, so freely, struck him with brutal force. No one else had spoken to him with such sincerity since his return. He had not expected kindness from her, not after the way he had left things. He lifted his chin, unable to allow vulnerability to linger. "England remains unchanged," he replied coolly. She smiled softly, a sad smile, one he did not understand. "Not entirely unchanged, Your Grace." He heard the message beneath her words. She had changed. She had grown. She was no longer a girl waiting for someone who would never return what she offered. And he was no longer the man she once knew, though he did not yet know what sort of man he had become. A gust of wind blew through the square, lifting the edge of her hair. For a moment, neither of them moved. He wanted to reach for her. God, the impulse shocked him, but he held still, frozen by the pride that had once driven them apart. "Good afternoon," she said softly, stepping back. He knew she was about to leave him again. "Evelyn," he said, the name slipping out with more desperation than he intended. She paused, startled. He swallowed. "May I call on you?" Silence. Her eyes lowered. "I believe that would not be wise, Your Grace." The rejection sliced through him, but he remained motionless, expression calm, voice cold. The training never failed him. "I understand," he said, though he did not. She curtsied gracefully. "Welcome home." And then she walked away. He stood in the marketplace long after she had gone, the noise of the town slowly returning around him, but he heard none of it. His gaze had fallen once more to the place where she had stood, and in that space, he felt something he had not felt since before the war. Emotion. Sharp, unwelcome, and utterly beyond his control. He had returned from battle cold as ice, but seeing her without a ring had done something to him, something irrevocable. And for the first time since he had set foot back on English soil, the Duke of Ravenshaw felt the one thing he had sworn he no longer possessed. Fear, not of war, not of death, but of her, and of what she still meant to him. Adrian rode back to Ravenshaw Manor with a heaviness that clung to him like the damp mist rising from the fields. Evelyn's presence, her voice, her altered composure, her ringless hand, followed him with a persistence he could neither command nor dismiss. He felt her silence inside his chest, as if she had left a quiet mark there with the simple refusal of allowing him to call on her. No soldier, no commander, no duke was prepared for the way a woman's calm dismissal could wound him more deeply than any blade. The manor appeared through the trees, solemn as always, but something about it felt smaller than he remembered. Or perhaps he had grown larger in other ways, harsher, colder, less willing to fit back into the world he had abandoned. His horse slowed as they approached the gates. By the time he dismounted, a faint tremor had returned to his hand. An involuntary shiver he despised, one of the relics the battlefield had carved into him. He hid it inside his glove before the stable boy could notice. Inside, he walked straight to the study. It was the same room where he had once written letters home. Letters filled with things he could never say aloud, confessions he never sent, drafts torn apart or burned before they could reach anyone, especially her. The large oak desk stood untouched, a thin layer of dust where no one had dared disturb his belongings. He brushed a finger across its surface, remembering a winter evening long before the war, when Evelyn had stood beside him here, laughing softly at something he had said, her breath warming the cold edges of the room. He sat down, the chair groaning faintly under the shift of his weight. He pressed his palms together, elbows on the desk, and lowered his head, a gesture he never allowed anyone to witness. He had faced artillery fire, starvation, betrayal, the weight of command, but the quiet of Ravenshaw, the empty echo of his own breath, was something else entirely. For 5 years, he had built walls around every place inside him. That remembered softness. He had convinced himself that Evelyn Ashbourne had belonged to a life he no longer possessed, a life that had ended the day he left England. Yet the moment he saw her in the square, standing with that calm dignity, the old pain had returned, not as a memory, but as a truth that had been waiting in silence. He had hurt her, badly. He had never allowed himself to revisit the details, but now, against his will, the memory rose. It had been the night before his departure. A storm had raged outside Ravenshaw, thunder echoing against the cliffs. She had come because she refused to say goodbye through a letter. She had stood in his library, soaked from the rain, eyes bright with fear and affection, and told him, quietly, bravely, that she wished him safe return, that she wished she could go with him, that she feared she would lose him forever. He had listened in utter stillness. And then, God, what a fool he had been. He had said words that froze her where she stood. "You will forget me." She had shaken her head, breath trembling, insisting she would not. And he, in his arrogance, in his terror of needing someone he could not protect, had hardened his voice until it wounded her. "I expect nothing from you, Evelyn, and I want nothing kept for me." He had watched the light in her eyes shatter, quietly, without accusation. She had left with a grace he did not deserve. He had gone to war the next morning, with the bitter triumph of a man who believed he had done the necessary thing, severing the thread before it could strangle him. But war had changed him. Pride had become a luxury he could no longer afford. Only now, years later, did he understand that he had not protected her that night. He had protected himself. He rose abruptly, pacing. His boots struck the floor with sharp, controlled steps. A duke did not unravel. A soldier did not flinch. But the memory followed him like a ghost he had kept locked away too long. He stopped at the window, staring. Out at the mist-covered gardens. The roses she used to admire were gone, withered by seasons of neglect. He exhaled shakily. He had not allowed himself to keep anything she loved, as if removing her belongings, trimming her influence from the manor, could erase her from his thoughts. But it never had. By late afternoon, he could no longer endure the suffocating quiet of the house. He left again, not to find her, he would not be so reckless yet, but to ride through the lands he now ruled. The key. Villagers stopped and bowed as he passed. Some looked at him with admiration, others with caution. He had always been a distant figure to them, and war had carved deeper shadows beneath his eyes, only increasing the distance. He dismounted near the river, where a narrow footbridge crossed the water. The place was familiar. He had once met Evelyn here on mornings when she sought solitude. She had loved the sound of the stream, the way the sunlight danced on the surface. Now, the water moved. Slower, heavy from the recent rains. He leaned against the stone railing, letting the quiet seep in, and though he tried to still his mind, he found her in every corner of it. He remembered the first time he had noticed her, not merely seen, but noticed. It had been at a summer gathering at Ashbourne Hall. He had just inherited the courtesy title of Marquess, while his father still held the dukedom. Evelyn had been seated beside the window, reading, while the other young ladies laughed by the piano. There had been no fanfare about her, no desperate attempts to impress. She had carried herself with a kind of gentleness that belied her intelligence. He had stood across the room, pretending not to stare at the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. He'd never admitted how much she had unsettled him even then. She had been the only woman who had seen past his aloofness, past the arrogant mask he had constructed long before the war. She had once asked him why he rarely spoke unless necessary. He had told her that silence kept a man safe. She had replied that silence also kept a man lonely. He closed his eyes now, inhaling sharply. She had been right, and yet he had chosen silence anyway. When the sun began to sink, he returned home. The staff had prepared dinner, but he had little appetite. He dismissed them early again, preferring the companionship of the fireplace to the murmur of well-intentioned servants. He sat in the great chair beneath the portrait of his father. The resemblance between them was striking. Strong jaw, sharp gaze, composed presence. But Adrian had never wanted to inherit the coldness of that portrait. He stared into the fire, its glow casting shifting light across the room. It reminded him of the nights at the front, where flames meant danger but also warmth. There, emotions were luxuries soldiers could not afford. Here, they were ghosts he had no choice but to confront. His mind drifted back to Evelyn's eyes, the moment she had looked at him in the marketplace. There had been shock, yes, but also restraint. She had built walls of her own, walls he had put there, walls that had once been delicate but were now reinforced by years of disappointment. He did not know if she hated him. The thought pierced him more deeply than he expected. He had faced men who despised him in battle, but the idea of Evelyn harboring hatred, or worse, indifference, was unbearable. The clock chimed softly. He rose slowly, as if the weight of the hours pressed against his bones. He wandered the manor halls, stopping at the long gallery. At the far end, there was a small painting he had intentionally ignored for years. A landscape, a gift from Evelyn the first year after they met. A simple depiction of the Ashbourne Gardens at dusk, colors soft and warm. He remembered the expression on her face when she had given it to him, a mixture of caution and hope. He had accepted it with more emotion than he had shown her. That night, he wrote a letter thanking her, but he never sent it. Pride had taken the pen from his hand, but regret had kept the letter folded in his drawer for 2 years. He had burned it the week he left for the war, believing it a necessary offering to independence. Now, standing before the painting, he felt as though the version of himself who had once received it was a stranger, a selfish one. He touched the frame lightly. The memory resurfaced, Evelyn laughing softly as she described how she had painted the sky, the blush of pink over the trees. He had listened, pretending he was unaffected, though her voice had stirred something he did not wish to examine. He let his hand fall. He turned away abruptly, the echo of his heavy footsteps following him down the hall. He did not know what he intended to do the next day, only that the war within him had begun to shift. For years, he had believed the battlefield had shaped him into a colder, stronger man. But seeing Evelyn had awakened something he had buried too deeply, the ability to feel. And feeling, he realized with a quiet sort of dread, posed a far greater danger than any weapon. He slept poorly. Dreams came in fragments of smoke, footsteps, her voice calling his name through rain. When morning broke, grey and heavy, he descended to breakfast earlier than usual. The staff exchanged cautious glances. They were unused to seeing him restless. In an uncharacteristic impulse, he asked for the carriage. He told himself he intended only to visit the parish council about estate matters. But he knew, even as he settled inside the carriage, what he truly hoped, that fate, or whatever force governed the movements of people, would grant him another glimpse of her. When the carriage reached the village, he stepped out without waiting for assistance. His presence drew immediate murmurs. Some men bowed, some women curtsied, but he paid them no mind. His gaze searched the streets with a quiet urgency he pretended he did not feel. He saw her. She was speaking with Mrs. Pembroke, the baker's wife, near the fountain. Evelyn's posture was calm, her smile gentle. She carried a small parcel wrapped in linen, likely bread or tea. The breeze moved her hair, and sunlight brushed her cheek in a way that stole his breath. He froze, not because of her beauty, but because of what it did to him, because of the old wound beneath his ribs that pulsed whenever she was near. He remained perfectly still, watching her, wanting her, and knowing he had no right to either. For the first time since returning to England, the Duke of Ravenshaw felt something dangerously close to yearning. And yearning, for a man who had once survived by denying himself everything tender, was a threat he understood all too well, a threat he could no longer ignore. The next days unfolded with a quiet tension Adrian could neither shake nor fully comprehend. He moved through his duties with the same precision that had once made him an unshakable commander. Meetings with tenants, estate decisions, correspondence with Parliament. But beneath each measured act ran a silent undercurrent, like a current beneath still winter waters. Evelyn occupied his thoughts with an insistence that both unsettled and infuriated him. He saw her everywhere, it seemed, not often enough to be accused of seeking her out intentionally, yet too frequently for the universe to call it coincidence. Sometimes it was only her silhouette crossing the far end of the square, or the echo of her laughter drifting from Mrs. Pembroke's shop, or the sweep of her skirt as she stepped into the milliner's. Each encounter cut through him the same way, quietly, deeply, like a violin string plucked in a direction he never intended to feel again. What unsettled him most was that Evelyn behaved with a sort of calm cordiality that revealed nothing. She did not avoid him, but she never lingered near him. She greeted him with the same grace she would offer any gentleman of the county, no more, and certainly no less. Her composure was impeccable, too impeccable. It made him wonder if she had learned to protect herself from him. And the thought, the idea that he had once held enough of her heart to require that kind of armoring, made something tighten inside him until he felt breathless. One late afternoon, while inspecting the repairs on the manor's west wing, he heard approaching footsteps. Turning, he saw his steward accompanied by a tall gentleman with light brown hair and a confident stride. The man moved with an ease that suggested both good breeding and some foreign charm, perhaps continental. His clothes were elegant, cut in a fashion a bit more daring than English sensibilities allowed, just enough to draw the eye. "Your Grace," the steward said, "may I present Mr. Charles Redford? He arrives from Bath, recently settled in the county." Redford offered a polite bow. His smile was open, friendly, the sort of expression Adrian had never mastered. "It is an honor, Your Grace. I've heard much about Ravenshaw's lands. Magnificent estate." Adrian nodded curtly. Compliments, even genuine ones, slid off him like rain from stone. "Bath, you said?" "Indeed," Redford replied. "My family has ties there, and I spent the last few years abroad, Florence, Vienna, a season in Paris." He paused, studying the Duke with interest. "Your reputation precedes you, of course. England is glad to have you back." The words were meant kindly. Adrian accepted them with a polite nod, but something about Redford's easy warmth irritated him in a way he could not explain. Perhaps it was the man's lack of hesitation, the effortless charm, or perhaps, as he soon discovered, it was the way his name began appearing more and more often from certain lips, particularly those belonging to Evelyn Ashbourne. 2 mornings later, as he rode toward the village, he caught sight of her walking alongside Mr. Redford. The two were engaged in conversation, their heads slightly inclined toward one another. Evelyn carried a small basket and Redford held an umbrella above them both despite the thin drizzle, his posture attentive, almost protective. The Duke's horse slowed to a halt without him consciously commanding it. He watched them from a distance, his breath cold in his chest. Redford was smiling. Evelyn was smiling, a soft, restrained smile, polite but real, holding the same quiet grace she had withheld from Adrian since his return. She brushed a loose curl from her temple as she spoke, and Redford leaned slightly closer to hear her over the rain. Adrian felt something sharp and unfamiliar lodge beneath his ribs, an ache so sudden it startled him. She had once walked beside him in the rain, years ago before the war. She had held the umbrella, laughing at the way he scowled at the weather as though he could command the skies. He had pretended to be unmoved, though her laughter had softened him more effectively than any sunlight. Now she walked with another man, a man who had not wounded her, a man who had not left. He corrected his posture, forcing his expression into its usual marble calm. But inside, something dark and restless began to stir, an emotion he had believed himself too disciplined, too hardened to feel. Jealousy. It was humiliating even to name it. A duke did not succumb to such trivial sentiments. He commanded regiments, inherited ancient lands, navigated the House of Lords with articled composure. And yet, here he sat, rain dampening his cloak, heart clenched like a young man undone by a simple, unbearable sight. He dismounted with slow, deliberate movements, every gesture measured. He approached them calmly, though an icy undertow pulled at his steps. "Miss Ashbourne," he said, his voice steady, cutting through the soft patter of rain. She inhaled sharply, a subtle intake of breath she hid behind her pleasant expression. "Your Grace." Redford turned, offering a gracious bow. "Duke Ravenshaw. Good morning." Adrian inclined his head. "Mr. Redford." Silence followed, a brief charged moment in which all three assessed one another with varying degrees of poise. Evelyn's gaze was lowered, respectful but distant. Redford's eyes held curiosity. The Duke's own expression betrayed nothing. "Miss Ashbourne has been so kind as to show me part of the village," Redford said lightly. "It seems I have much to learn about the area." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Indeed. And I have offered to assist, Mr. Redford," Evelyn added softly. "My father asked me to show him the route to the parish school. He has expressed interest in funding some repairs." Adrian's eyes shifted to her, the faintest flicker of surprise crossing his features. Of all the things she could have said, that was not what he expected. Evelyn had always been generous, always ready to help others. He remembered that about her. Yet the memory only deepened the ache inside him. "I see," he said quietly. "You are welcome to join us, Your Grace," Redford offered in warm courtesy. "If your morning is free." The offer was genuine, but Adrian felt the underlying challenge, or perhaps he invented it, born from the twisting tension inside him. He did not accept. Instead, he looked at Evelyn, searching for something he could not name, a sign, a hesitation, a fleeting glance that might give him some irrational reassurance that she did not enjoy Redford's company too deeply, but her expression was perfectly serene. "I will not intrude," the Duke said, his tone smooth but distant. "Miss Ashbourne, Mr. Redford." He bowed his head slightly, turned, walked toward his horse with the same disciplined calm he had used to withdraw troops under fire. Only once he was mounted did he allow his composure to crack, just enough for his hand to tremble against the reins. The rain masked the tightness of his breath. He rode off in silence, the village receding behind him. But Evelyn's soft smile toward another man carved itself into his mind like a wound that refused to close. He returned to the manor and spent the afternoon in restless half-focus. He attempted to read correspondence, but the words blurred. He walked the length of the library twice, the echo of his boots a steady, unrelenting rhythm against the floor. Yet it brought no calm. By evening he found himself alone in the music room, a place he rarely entered. Dust had settled on the piano's surface. He brushed it away, absent-mindedly. Evelyn used to play the piano. She once filled Ravenshaw with music so gentle it made the air itself feel softer. He remembered her hands gliding over the keys, remembered the way she tilted her head when a melody troubled her. He had never touched the instrument, yet watching her had felt like witnessing something sacred. He sat now, placing one gloved hand atop the closed lid. The silence of the room pressed into him. He closed his eyes, trying to banish the image of her with Redford, but he could not. In the deep quiet, he admitted the truth. He was jealous, bitterly, foolishly jealous, of a man who had done nothing wrong, a man who simply stood where he had once stood, a man who had not pushed her away, had not left her with a memory she had likely spent years trying to forget. He remembered once telling Evelyn that he was not the sort of man who loved easily. She had smiled, telling him that some men loved more deeply for their restraint. He had not believed her then. Now he felt the weight of that truth pressing on him like a blade against the heart. The next time he saw her was at the Harringtons' evening gathering, a small affair, scarcely more than 20 guests, but enough to stir the usual provincial gossip. Adrian had not intended to attend. Crowds unsettled him now. Too many voices, too many faces, too many expectations. But he learned through a harmless remark from Lady Pembroke that Evelyn would be present. That alone was enough to compel him to dress with formal precision and make his way to Harrington Hall. The moment he entered the drawing room, every pair of eyes took note. Conversations dipped in volume. A duke was not easily ignored. He greeted the hosts with impeccable courtesy, but his gaze drifted almost immediately across the room. He found her near the windows. She wore a gown of deep burgundy, the color rich against her fair skin, her hair pinned with understated elegance. She held a glass of punch, listening attentively to something Mr. Redford said beside her. The two stood a little too close. Adrian's chest tightened. Lady Harrington approached him. "Your Grace," she began warmly. "It is a pleasure." But the Duke barely heard her. His focus was fixed on Evelyn. On the way, she laughed. Not loudly, not provocatively, but gently, warmly. A rare sound he had once believed he would do anything to protect. "Your Grace?" He blinked, forcing his attention back. "Forgive me. The journey here was long." Lady Harrington studied him with interest, but drifted away, merciful enough not to. "Proiche." Adrian crossed the room slowly, every movement deliberate. He did not approach Evelyn immediately. Instead, he circled nearer to the musicians, pretending interest in the quartet. But his gaze flicked toward her often. When Redford offered her his arm and she accepted it without hesitation, Adrian's breath caught. The two walked toward the balcony doors, moving through the soft glow of candlelight like a pair who had known each other longer than a week. He felt a chill travel through him, a different cold than the one he carried from the war. This one was jagged, human, painful. The music swelled, the candles flickered, and inside the Duke something dark and deeply buried began to crack. Evelyn stepped onto the balcony with Redford, her silhouette framed by moonlight. She seemed at peace. Adrian, standing in the shadows of the drawing room, felt the taste of something bitter at the back of his throat. For the first time since returning from war, he understood that the battlefield he feared most was the one inside him, and he was losing. The night of the Harrington gathering lingered with Adrian long after he left the house's golden glow behind. The cold ride back to Ravenshaw should have cleared his mind, but it did nothing of the sort. He rode hard, the horse's hooves striking sparks from the stones, as though trying to outrun the storm building in his chest. He told himself he had misread the situation, that Evelyn's soft laughter, her acceptance of Redford's arm, the way she leaned slightly toward him on the balcony, were all innocently born of conversation and nothing more. But every attempt at reason only deepened the ache within him. By the time he reached the manor, the moon had climbed high above the cliffs. Even the staff sensed his turmoil and retreated quietly to their quarters. Adrian walked straight past the grand staircase, past the portraits of ancestors who judged him silently from their gilded frames, and entered the study. He shut the door, harder than he meant to, the echo cracking through the room like a gunshot. The fire was low. He threw off his gloves, tossed them upon the desk, and braced both hands on the edge as if fighting to steady himself. His reflection glimmered faintly in the darkened window, a tall, rigid figure, shoulders tense, jaw locked, eyes sharp with a pain he refused to name. It infuriated him that another man's presence beside Evelyn could affect him with such violence. A duke was expected to maintain composure, indifference, aloof control. Yet jealousy had settled under his skin like frost that refused to thaw. He had no right to her. He knew this painfully well. He had forfeited that right the night he told her to forget him. And yet, God help him, he wanted to reclaim something he had once thrown away with careless words. A knock interrupted the stillness. He turned, surprised. This late, no one approached the study unless summoned. "Your Grace," came the butler's cautious voice. A message arrived from Ashbourne Hall. The name struck him like a blow to the ribs. He straightened abruptly. "From Miss Ashbourne?" "I believe so, Your Grace." He strode forward, took the sealed letter, and dismissed the butler with a curt nod. His pulse quickened, not with hope but with confusion. Evelyn had refused to let him call on her. Why send a letter now? He broke the seal. There were only a few lines written in her familiar, elegant hand. "Your Grace, my father requests the honor of your presence tomorrow morning at Ashbourne Hall to discuss matters regarding the parish land. He insisted I deliver the message personally. I hope the time is convenient for you. Miss Evelyn Ashbourne." It was formal. Too formal. Painfully so. Every line was crafted with such deliberate restraint that he could almost feel the distance she wished to maintain. He closed the letter slowly, his fingers tightening around it. So, she wished to keep him at arm's length. She wished to speak only of land, of parish matters, of responsibilities that demanded no emotion from either side. It was reasonable. It was proper. It was unbearable. That night, he slept less than he had in months. When the dawn finally came, grey and heavy, he dressed with meticulous care, as though armor alone could fortify him. He mounted his horse and rode toward Ashbourne Hall, the cold wind carving a line down his spine. The grand house came into view through the morning mist. Its windows glowed faintly with the first light, the gardens trimmed neatly for winter. Evelyn stood on the steps, waiting, not for him, he told himself, but out of courtesy. She wore a deep green dress beneath a wool cloak, her hands clasped lightly before her. The sight of her there, poised and still, tightened something in his chest. She curtsied as he approached. "Your Grace." He bowed slightly. "Miss Ashbourne." Their eyes met, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw a flicker of something unguarded in her gaze. A memory, a question, a shadow of what they once had. But it vanished before he could interpret it. "My father is in the drawing room," she said, turning with quiet grace. "He asked that I escort you." He followed her down the hallway lined with family portraits. The air between them was taut with unspoken things. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain, to say something that would soften the rigid politeness she offered him. But his pride latched onto his tongue like an iron clasp. When they reached the drawing room, Mr. Ashbourne greeted him warmly, speaking at length about the parish boundaries, the repairs needed, the funding required. Adrian answered with precise, controlled responses. He agreed to finance the repairs. He agreed to inspect the land personally. He agreed to everything. But his attention, his entire awareness, remained fixed on Evelyn, seated quietly near the window, her hands folded in her lap. She did not speak. She did not look at him, and that silence gnawed at him more fiercely than any battlefield memory. When the meeting ended, Mr. Ashbourne excused himself to retrieve documents. Evelyn stood as well, intending to follow her father, but Adrian stepped forward before he could think better of it. "Miss Ashbourne," he said, voice low. She stopped. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned to face him. He stepped closer, carefully, cautiously, like a man approaching a wound he himself had inflicted. "I wish to thank you," he said quietly, "for delivering the letter." Her gaze lowered. "It was my duty." He felt the faint sting of her words. Duty, not choice, not desire to speak with him, only obligation. He took a breath. "Evelyn." Her name slipped out before he could restrain it. She inhaled softly, her fingers tightening around the folds of her dress. He forced the rest of his thought into something more controlled. "I fear I owe you an apology." Her eyes lifted, startled. He had never apologized easily, not even in youth. The admission seemed to pull her breath from her. "For what, Your Grace?" she asked. "For many things," he said after a long pause, "most of which I have not yet found the courage to articulate." A faint tremor crossed her expression. Hurt, perhaps, or anger, long buried. "Your Grace, that was years ago." "Yes," he murmured, "and yet time does not absolve a man of guilt." She looked away, a shadow passing over her features. "It absolves him of relevance." His breath caught. She had wounded him, cleanly, elegantly, with the precision of someone who had spent years mastering self-control. He stepped closer despite himself. "May I explain?" "No," she said gently but firmly. "It is not necessary." "It is," he insisted, though his voice remained calm. "I spoke cruelly to you that night. I acted out of pride, out of fear." She swallowed. The soft movement of her throat was the only visible reaction. "You do not owe me an explanation." "Then allow me to offer one regardless." "Your Grace." She shook her head softly, her composure wavering. "It would change nothing." The words hit him with quiet, devastating force. Something inside him cracked, a fine, fragile fracture that ran straight through his carefully constructed calm. Before he could speak again, Mr. Ashbourne returned, and the moment collapsed like a fragile glass dropped to the floor. Evelyn turned away at once, stepping toward her father. Adrian stood rooted to the spot, every muscle taut. The meeting concluded shortly. He left Ashbourne Hall with the echo of her voice haunting him. It would change nothing. But the break, the true break, came that evening. He had intended to isolate himself in the manor, drown his thoughts in paperwork or silence. But as the hours passed, a restless impulse drove him back toward the village. He walked instead of riding, as though the cold night air might temper the storm inside him. As he turned a corner near the square, he saw lantern light glowing from the terrace of the small tea room. Through the window, he saw her, Evelyn, sitting at a table with Redford. The scene was painfully simple. 2 cups of tea, steam rising between them, her hair loosened slightly from the wind, his posture angled in attentive ease. They were talking, smiling. She touched the edge of her cup, and Redford leaned forward to say something that made her laugh quietly. Adrian froze. The lantern light cast a warm glow over them, illuminating a tenderness he had never allowed himself. Redford's expression held admiration, interest. Evelyn's held ease, a kind of ease Adrian had not seen in her presence since before the war. His stomach tightened. Without thinking, he stepped closer to the window, his hands curled into fists at his sides. A painful, raw ache spread through him, one he could neither reason with nor suppress. Redford's hand brushed lightly against Evelyn's on the table. The contact was small, fleeting, but it shattered him. Something inside the Duke broke, not loudly, not violently, but with quiet, devastating finality. The realization settled upon him like snow on a grave. He had lost her, not through war, not through death, through himself, through pride, through the words he had spoken 5 years ago and the silence he had maintained ever since. Evelyn pulled her hand back gently, not inviting affection but not admonishing it either. She said something Adrian could not hear, her expression thoughtful, tinged with sadness. He stood in the shadows like a ghost at the edge of his own past, watching. The life he might have had slip further from reach, with every quiet moment between her and another man. He left before the scene could wound him further. He walked back through the empty streets, the cold night settling heavily around him. When he reached Ravenshaw, he went straight to the balcony outside his chambers, gripping the stone railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. He stared out at the dark hills, and for the first time since returning from war, the Duke of Ravenshaw allowed the truth to fully, painfully settle. He was afraid. Afraid of losing her completely, afraid it was already too late, afraid that the man he had become, the cold, distant, unfeeling version of himself, was incapable of earning back the heart he had once shattered. And beneath that fear lay something deeper still, something he had not dared admit. He still loved her, more fiercely, more painfully than he had ever allowed himself to understand. The morning after seeing Evelyn in the tea room with Redford dawned grey and mercilessly quiet. Adrian stood beside the tall windows of his chamber, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the mist that clung stubbornly to the fields stretching beyond Ravenshaw. The landscape looked distant, blurred, as if the world itself were withdrawing from him, or perhaps he was withdrawing from it. He felt hollow, as though a piece of himself had splintered off during the night and left him incomplete. The image of Evelyn laughing softly in the glow of candlelight, sitting across from another man, had carved itself into him with cruel precision. He had endured battlefields, explosions, ambushes, starvation, but none of those trials had wounded him with the sharp, delicate brutality of that simple sight. For the first time since his return, he felt truly exhausted. Not the physical exhaustion of a soldier, but a deeper, quieter fatigue. the kind that seeped into the soul. The war had taken much from him, but he had believed he could rebuild, restore, return. Seeing Evelyn with someone who did not carry the weight of 5 years of mistakes showed him what he had refused to accept. Some losses were permanent. He did not attempt to see her that day, nor the next, nor the one after. He withdrew, first from the village, then from society entirely. He filled his days with estate matters that demanded none of his heart, overseeing the harvest accounts, reviewing contracts, inspecting stables, riding the perimeter of the property with an intensity that alarmed the staff. But no amount of discipline could drown out the memory of Evelyn's soft smile offered to another man. The more he resisted his emotions, the more fiercely they rose. Late one evening, after the manor had fallen silent, he found himself alone in the gallery of portraits. The candle he carried cast flickering light across the faces of long-dead Hawthorns, dukes and duchesses, earls and viscountesses, men and women who had played their roles with varying degrees of success and failure. But it was the portrait of his mother that drew him. She had been a gentlewoman, too gentle for the rigid world she had married into. She had died while he was away, her final letter to him never answered. Her eyes in the portrait held a softness he had not inherited. Standing before her image now, he felt a quiet ache. His mother had once told him, when he was barely 15, that a man who feared tenderness would never find peace. He had not understood then. He understood. Now, he traced a gloved finger lightly along the edge of the frame. "I have ruined everything," he whispered, though no one was there to hear him. Everything. The words felt foreign, yet undeniably true. In the days that followed, he did not see Evelyn, even by accident. Perhaps she avoided the village when he visited. Perhaps fate succeeded where he failed. Or perhaps Redford had begun escorting her more frequently. Adrian's imagination tortured him with possibilities he could not bear to dwell upon. Eventually, the whispers reached him. He overheard 2 maids speaking near the servants' corridor. "They say Mr. Redford is quite taken with Miss Ashbourne. And she with him, I heard. They make a handsome pair." He had turned away before they could finish, the injury too fresh, too deep. Another afternoon, he overheard 2 gentlemen at the club murmuring, "Redford's intentions seem serious. Ashbourne is a respectable match." "Indeed, and Miss Evelyn seems to enjoy his company." Adrian left the club immediately, the clink of glasses and laughter echoing behind him like mockery. He spent that night walking the length of the garden in silence, cold air stinging his face, cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. A storm brewed overhead, one of those unending English tempests that threatened rain but held back, as if savoring the tension. He walked through the hedges, past the fountain that had once made Evelyn smile during a garden party years ago. He remembered how she had dipped her finger into the water, laughing at the cold, and how he had pretended to be unaffected, though he'd felt her laughter like sunlight. Now, everything about Ravenshaw felt haunted by her memory. Every room, every path, every melody that drifted from the music room when the staff played in the afternoons. Everything was touched by her presence, though she had not stepped foot in the manor for years. By the time the storm finally broke, pouring rain onto the stone terraces, he was soaked to the bone but did not return inside. The rain felt almost purifying, if pain could be counted as cleansing. The next morning, he received a letter from Mr. Ashbourne requesting his signature on the parish funding he had promised. Adrian signed it with a hand slightly unsteady from lack of sleep. He returned the letter immediately, resisting the urge to add a note for Evelyn. He had no right to her attention anymore. Every attempt he had made to reach her had been met with gentle but unmistakable distance. He had lost her, and the more he tried to accept it, the more unbearable it became. One evening, he stood near the cliffside behind the manor, looking at the sea far below. The wind howled against the rocks, lifting his cloak and biting into his throat. He had stood on cliffs like these abroad, where the ocean was violent and unpredictable. He had felt nothing then. But now, standing on the familiar soil of home, he felt too much. He knelt beside the old bench overlooking the sea. Evelyn had once sat here with him during their brief, fragile friendship. He remembered her voice, soft, thoughtful. She had spoken of dreams, of fears, of love as something fragile but wondrous. He had listened in silence, unwilling to open himself. She had asked him once, "Do you ever imagine what life might be like if you allowed yourself to be known?" He had not answered her. He had feared that letting her know him would give her the power to break him. Now he knew the truth. He had broken himself by shutting her out. He bowed his head, breath uneven. The separation was not something Evelyn had enacted deliberately. It was something he had created. And now she was simply moving on. News deepened his despair a few days later. Lady Pembroke approached him in the village square, smiling warmly. "Your Grace," she said, "I saw Miss Ashbourne and Mr. Redford walking together yesterday. I believe his intentions may be quite honourable." Adrian forced a polite expression. "I see. It is a comfort to know she may find happiness," Lady Pembroke continued, "after all these years of waiting." He hesitated. "Waiting? Oh," she said quickly, realizing her misstep. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I merely meant Miss Ashbourne turned down several suitors while you were abroad. It was assumed that she still... Well, never mind." She curtsied and hurried away. Adrian remained very still. So Evelyn had waited. For years. For a man who had left her wounded. For a man who had returned from... war colder than the stone walls of Ravenshaw. And now she was finally letting go. That night the storm outside grew violent, a mirror to the tempest inside him. He could not sleep. He paced the manor until the candles burned low. Memories tormented him. Her laughter, her tears the night he pushed her away, her kindness, her patience, her quiet bravery. All the things he had not valued when he still had the chance. At midnight, he stopped in the doorway of the music room. The piano sat there, untouched, gathering dust. He approached it slowly, as if afraid it might disappear. He removed one glove and ran his fingers across the keys. He pressed one. A single note echoed in the quiet. Another, and another. He remembered Evelyn teaching a group of village children to sing here once, her voice soft as snow. He remembered her hands guiding theirs along the keys. He remembered feeling something dangerous then, something like yearning. He pressed a few more keys, but the sound cracked, and with it something inside him cracked as well. He dropped his head into his hands, fingers gripping his hair, breath trembling. For the first time since returning from war, he allowed himself something he had denied for 5 years. Grief. Quiet, restrained, shaking but soundless. The tears did not fall, but his body shook with the effort of holding them back. His heart clenched painfully, echoing the truth he had tried desperately to ignore. He had not lost Evelyn to another man. He had lost her to time, to choices, to pride. Days passed, then a week, then nearly 2. The village whispered more and more about Evelyn and Redford. Adrian withdrew further, speaking to no one unless necessary. He buried himself in estate accounts, in responsibilities, in anything that did not require emotion. But the separation, the distance he had created, the distance she now reinforced, hunted him. One evening, after a long council meeting in London, he returned home late. The journey had been cold, and the streets of London had offered no distraction from the weight in his chest. He stood outside Ravenshaw, staring at the windows glowing softly in the dark. Yet the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a mausoleum, built of memories he could not escape. He walked the grounds restlessly, still unable to enter. The fog sat thick over the hill, muting even the sound of the sea. When he finally stepped inside, the butler informed him that a delivery had arrived. A parcel from Ashbourne Hall. His breath caught. He opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a book Evelyn had borrowed years ago from Ravenshaw's library. She had kept it all this time, and now she had returned it. A note rested inside the cover. "Your Grace, I discovered this while sorting through old belongings. It seemed only proper to return it to its rightful place. My apologies for the delay. Miss Evelyn Ashbourne." He stared at the note until the edges blurred. It was not hostility. It was not affection. It was something infinitely worse. Finality. That night he stood in the rain outside the manor, letting the storm soak him completely. He remained for almost an hour, unmoving, as if willing the cold to carve numbness into him. He did not know what he would do next, but he knew one thing with painful clarity. He could no longer remain this version of himself, this ghost wandering Ravenshaw's halls. If he did nothing, he would lose her forever. And the thought of that loss, permanent, irretrievable, was something even a soldier could not survive. The night after Evelyn returned his book, Adrian made a decision, one he did not speak aloud, one even he barely understood. It formed slowly, painfully, like a bruise beneath the skin. He could not continue as he had been, walking the corridors of Ravenshaw like a spectre, pretending indifference while each breath cost him something deeper. Something had to change. He spent the rainy morning in silence, watching the storm lash against the windows. The rain blurred the world outside, smearing the gardens into a wash of grey and silver. It suited his thoughts too well. By midday, resolve settled in him like iron. He would speak to Evelyn, not to win her back, not yet, perhaps not ever, but to tell her the truth he had withheld for 5 agonizing years. She deserved at least that. And he needed it. Whether she forgave him or not, whether she loved another man or not, he had to face the break he himself created. He rode to Ashbourne Hall that afternoon, the road slick with rain, the horse's hooves sending up small sprays of mud. He felt the familiar armor sliding over him, his posture straightening, his expression smoothing, his mind preparing for the confrontation. Not the confrontation of anger, but of vulnerability, of truth. When he reached the estate, the rain eased into a fine mist. The house stood still and elegant, with lamps beginning to glow in the windows as evening approached. He dismounted, gave the reins to the stable boy and ascended the steps. But when the door opened, he did not find Evelyn. He found Mr. Ashbourne. The older man's expression shifted from polite surprise to mild concern. "Your Grace," he greeted, "this is unexpected. Is there some urgent matter?" Adrian hesitated. "I wish to speak with Miss Ashbourne." Mr. Ashbourne shifted uncomfortably. "Ah, I am afraid she is not at home this afternoon." A beat. "Is she visiting the village?" Adrian asked quietly. "No." The answer came too quickly, too clipped. Then the older man sighed, softening. "Your Grace, forgive me. Evelyn has gone to stay with her aunt for a time. A visit, long overdue. A visit, a departure, a separation." Adrian's breath stilled. His pulse beat once, slow, heavy, before steadying into something tight and controlled. "Is she well?" he asked. "She is reflective," Mr. Ashbourne admitted. "She has been troubled, I think, torn. She does not speak of it, but a father knows." Adrian's chest tightened. Mr. Ashbourne looked at him with a gentleness Adrian did not expect. "If I may speak plainly, Your Grace, you and Evelyn share a history that still lives in her. She feels it deeply, but she is afraid." Adrian swallowed. "She has reason to be." A long pause settled between them, filled only by the soft patter of rain. "Your Grace," Mr. Ashbourne said quietly, "my daughter waited years for a man who never offered certainty. Then that same man returned colder than winter itself. Can you understand the confusion she now feels?" Adrian closed his eyes briefly. A painful breath escaped him. "Yes," Mr. Ashbourne nodded. "I do not know what you intend, but I ask you, as her father, not to awaken her feelings if you do not intend to nurture them." Adrian's voice was barely audible. "I intend nothing but what is right for her." Mr. Ashbourne studied him a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Then I wish you clarity, Your Grace, for both your sakes." Adrian bowed his head and left. He did not go home immediately. Instead, he rode aimlessly through the countryside until the mist thickened into fog. By nightfall, he found himself near the river, the place where Evelyn once sat reading, where she had once walked barefoot across the grass, where she had smiled at him with an innocence he had never earned. He dismounted, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The river rushed past, its sound reminding him of voices he could not silence. He stared at the water, breathing deeply, letting the cold numb the ache. Then slowly he removed his gloves. His hands trembled slightly, but not from cold, from truth. He whispered her name into the fog. "Evelyn." It vanished into the night like a confession. He returned to Ravenshaw long after the lamps had been lit inside. The butler met him with a concern he hid beneath propriety. Adrian dismissed him with a nod and went directly to the study. He shut the door, leaned against it, and exhaled slowly. She was gone. He had expected pain. He had not expected the emptiness to be quite so vast. For days he moved like a man lost between duties. He read letters without absorbing them. He rode through the estate fields without remembering the journey. The staff whispered softly of his distraction, though none dared interrupt it. Until the morning he received an invitation. Lady Harrington, ever the mistress of gatherings, requested his presence at an evening dinner. A small affair, she said. Guests of quality. A quiet opportunity to re-engage with society. He considered declining. He had no patience for forced conversation or artificial cheer, but something in him, pride or fear or a sense of inevitability, urged him to accept. Redford would likely be there. Perhaps Evelyn too returned from her aunt's household. He did not know which frightened him more. That evening he dressed in formal black, the kind worn to state functions, a style that accentuated his severity. He descended the stairs with the silence of a man walking toward a verdict. The ride to Harrington Hall was short. Lamps glowed warmly through the windows as snowflakes drifted from the sky, soft and white. Inside, the air held the scent of pine and winter roses. He stepped into the drawing room, greeted by murmurs and bows. He nodded politely, masking the storm within. Then he saw her, Evelyn, standing near the hearth. She had returned. She wore a gown of soft ivory, simple but elegant. Her hair swept upward in a way that revealed the curve of her neck. Her cheeks were touched with a faint flush from the fire's warmth. She looked calm, sad perhaps, but serene. Redford was beside her. Of course he was. The sight struck Adrian so sharply he felt it physically. Yet he did not move toward her. Not yet. He watched from a distance, every nerve alert, every breath controlled. Redford was speaking to her softly. She listened, politely, attentively, but Adrian noticed something in her posture he had not expected. Distance, a step too far. Stiffness in her hands, a quiet heaviness beneath the elegance. She was troubled. He could feel it across the room. Lady Harrington approached him. "Your Grace," she murmured, "you seem distracted." He forced a faint smile. "I find the room warm." She raised a brow. "It is not the room that is warm. It is the company." She glanced, obviously, shamelessly, toward Evelyn. Adrian's jaw tightened. The dinner was served. He found himself seated across the table from Evelyn. The candlelight flickered over her features, casting gold along her skin, making her look almost dreamlike. She did not meet his eyes, yet something about her demeanor told him she was acutely aware of his presence. Conversation flowed around them, light, pleasant, meaningless. Adrian spoke when addressed, but his focus remained entirely on her. He watched the way she lifted her glass, the steady calm in her movements, the occasional downward flicker of her gaze that hinted at thoughts she did not share. Redford leaned toward her at one point, saying something intended to amuse. She smiled politely, briefly, but the smile did not reach her eyes. And Adrian knew she was not his. But she was not Redford's either. Not yet. Dinner ended. Guests moved into the adjoining conservatory, where musicians played soft violin. The windows fogged with winter's breath, the moon faint behind the drifting snow. Evelyn stepped toward the balcony doors, alone. She opened them and stepped into the cold evening air. Adrian did not hesitate. He followed her. She stood at the railing, breath visible in the frigid air, eyes fixed on the snow-covered gardens. She heard his footsteps, but did not turn. "Miss Ashbourne," he said softly. Her shoulders tensed. Slowly, she faced him. "Your Grace." Snow glimmered in the dark, drifting between them. Adrian approached with measured steps, stopping several paces away, close enough to speak, far enough to respect the boundaries she had made painfully clear. "I was informed," he said, quietly, "that you had gone to stay with your aunt." "I needed time," she replied, her voice steady but subdued. "Time to think." He nodded once. "Did you find the clarity you sought?" A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Some things only grow more complicated the longer one contemplates them." He exhaled, the breath trembling. "Forgive me if I intrude by asking, are you—" He hesitated, the words sticking like thorns. Are you considering Mr. Redford's attentions? Her gaze lowered. Snowflakes settled on her lashes. He has been kind. I do not doubt it. But kindness is not the same as knowing one's heart. He felt the world shift slightly, like a boat adjusting to a gentler current. Evelyn, he said, voice breaking before he steadied it. I have done you the greatest injustice, I know this. She closed her eyes as if bracing herself. He continued quietly, painfully. I hurt you the night before I left. I wounded you with pride, with fear, with words I regret more than anything. I endured in the war. Her lashes fluttered. I do not ask for forgiveness, he said. I know I have no right to that, but I needed to tell you, the man you knew then was afraid of needing someone he could not protect. She swallowed hard. And the man you are now. He stepped closer, the snow crunching underfoot. The man I am now is afraid of losing the only person he ever... He stopped. His breath caught. His chest tightened. She waited. He forced the words out, raw and unguarded. The only person he ever loved. The snow fell silently around them. Evelyn's inhale was sharp, stunned, almost painful. He had never spoken the word aloud. Not to her, not to anyone. I am not asking for anything, he whispered. I only wished for you to know, before you choose a life with someone else. Her voice trembled. Adrian, I do not know what to say. He took a step back, bowing his head. You need say nothing. I have imposed enough. He turned to leave. Your Grace. Adrian. Wait. He froze. She took one hesitant step toward him. Her eyes held tears she would not let fall. I do not know what choice I must make. I only know that I never wanted you to be the man you became after the war. He swallowed, throat tight. And yet, she whispered, I never stopped hoping that one day you might return as the man you once were, or perhaps someone better. He looked up sharply. She shook her head, forcing composure. But hope can only survive so much. He felt the words strike deep, painful, honest. She continued softly, If you wish to prove you have changed, it must be through action, not confession. He nodded slowly. Then I shall act. She inhaled shakily. I do not promise forgiveness. I do not seek ease, he replied. Only the chance to do right. A long silence stretched between them. Good night, Your Grace, she whispered. He bowed his head. Good night, Evelyn. She turned first. He remained in the snow long after she had gone, breath unsteady, heart pounding with something fierce and alive. Redemption would not be simple, but for the first time he intended to fight for her, not with pride, not with arrogance, but with the quiet persistence of a man who had finally learned the cost of losing the one he loved. And as the snowstorm thickened around him, the Duke of Ravenshaw made his vow he would return to her, not with words, with proof. Winter settled over the county with a softness that belied its bitterness. Snow covered the fields and rooftops, muting every sound, as though the world were holding its breath in anticipation of something inevitable. For Adrian, the days following his conversation with Evelyn felt like a quiet reckoning, each morning weighed with the knowledge that he had finally spoken the truth, and each night haunted by the fear that it had come far too late. He acted. He began with small gestures, never directed at her directly, respectful of her boundaries, mindful of the fragility of the ground between them. He visited the parish school himself, ensuring the repairs he had promised were underway. He met with the village council, offered support to families struggling after the early frost-ruined part of the harvest, and opened Ravenshaw's storehouses in a move that startled even his own steward. He did not do these things for praise, and he did not tell Evelyn. Adrian knew that words had once failed her. Now, only quiet transformation would mean anything. The villagers noticed. Gentle murmurs followed. Him through the square, surprise, respect. A kind of awe at the Duke who had once been distant returning with a different presence, softer in his sternness. Yet none of this eased the heaviness in his chest. He had not seen Evelyn since the night of the snowfall. Her absence gnawed at the edges of his resolve. Perhaps she needed time. Perhaps she needed distance. Perhaps she wished never to see him again. He forced himself to accept each possibility in silence. But fate, or something like it, intervened. One late afternoon, as the sun began to set in pale gold over the frozen river, Adrian rode into the village to deliver documents to the blacksmith. The air was still, clouds tinged with pink. A faint trail of smoke drifted from chimneys. The winter hush made everything feel suspended. As he passed the bookshop, he saw her. Evelyn stood near the window, her cloak wrapped tightly around her, her breath forming small clouds in the cold. She was alone, looking at a display of newly arrived volumes. A soft strand of hair had escaped her bonnet, brushing lightly against her cheek. Her posture was relaxed, yet there was something contemplative in her stillness, something quietly troubled. His heart tightened. He dismounted before he could think better of it. His boots crunched softly in the snow as he approached. She must have sensed him, for she turned just before he reached her. Their eyes met, and something inside him broke and mended all at once. "Your Grace," she said, gently, not coldly, not like before. Her tone held something fragile, uncertain. "Miss Ashbourne." Silence stretched between them, delicate as lace. She looked down at the book in her hands, a small collection of poetry, and then back at him. He noticed the faint tremor in her fingers before she hid them in her cloak. "I heard," she said softly, "that you assisted the parish school." He blinked, surprised. "News travels quickly." "It does," she whispered, "especially when a man acts with sincerity." A breath escaped him, visible in the cold air. It was nothing deserving of praise. "Perhaps not," she said. "And yet, it meant something." He swallowed. "I did not do it for meaning. I did it because it was right." Her eyes softened, but she did not speak further. She turned slightly toward the river, and he found himself walking with her, carefully, without presuming closeness. They stopped at the edge of the square, where the snow lay untouched except for the delicate imprint of distant footsteps. For several moments neither spoke, then Evelyn broke the silence. "Adrian, may I ask you something?" The use of his name, his given name, struck him with quiet force. "Yes," he said, voice low. "When we spoke on the balcony," she began, hesitating as though afraid to disturb fragile ground, "you said you acted out of fear, years ago. Fear of needing someone you could not protect." He nodded once, unable to meet her gaze. She continued, her voice trembling slightly. "And now? What does fear make of you now?" He forced himself to look at her, and there in her eyes, soft, wide, searching, he saw not accusation, but an honest plea for truth. He inhaled deeply, cold air filling strained lungs. "Fear makes me a man who understands that losing you would be a wound no victory or title could ever mend." Her lips parted, breath catching. He stepped closer, but not too close, just enough to let the truth pass between them with the weight it deserved. Snowflakes drifted around, them catching in her hair, dusting his coat. "I returned from war colder than I had ever been," he said. "I believed distance was strength. I believed silence was safety, but all it ever did was dull whatever remained of me." Her eyes glistened. He went on, his voice low, quiet, confessional. "When I saw you again, when I saw your hand without a ring, I felt something I had not felt since before I left. Not hope," he added, shaking his head faintly. "Fear, and longing, and regret so fierce I could scarcely breathe." Evelyn's chin quivered, though she lifted it with dignity. He took a slow breath. "I cannot undo the years I cost you, nor the pain I caused you, but I can offer you the man I am now, not the cold shell I returned as, not the proud boy you once knew." He paused. "But a man who would choose you above his pride, above his title, above every piece of armor he has ever worn." Her breath trembled visibly. He dropped his gaze, not in weakness, but in reverence. "I ask for nothing. I assume nothing. I only wished you to know." She was silent for a long moment, so long he feared he had shattered whatever fragile bridge had existed between them. Then she spoke, voice barely audible. "Adrian, I loved you once." The world tilted. He lifted his head slowly. She continued, tears glittering unshed in her eyes. "I loved you with the kind of innocence that believes love alone can carry weight you refuse to share. I waited years for a letter that never came. I held on to hope until it bruised me." Her throat tightened, and when you returned and looked through me as though I were a stranger, I thought I had finally been freed from the ache." His chest constricted painfully. She went on, "But then you spoke to me. You apologized. You changed." A tear escaped down her cheek. "And now I find myself afraid again." He wanted to reach for her. God, every instinct in him ached to wipe the tear from her skin, but he forced his hands to remain at his sides. "What do you fear?" he asked, voice breaking. "You," she whispered. Snow fell between them in delicate silence. "And yet," she continued, voice trembling, "I fear losing you more." He closed his eyes in anguish. Evelyn took a shaky breath, gathering strength. "You said you did not ask for forgiveness, and perhaps you are right. Forgiveness cannot be requested." She paused. "But it can be earned." He opened his eyes slowly. She stepped toward him. Just a few inches. Enough that he could see every fleck of gold in her irises. Enough that her breath mingled with the cold air between them. "You must understand something, Adrian," she whispered. "I do not know if I can trust you with my heart again. I do not know if I am strong enough to endure another fracture." His voice was a bare whisper. "I would rather die than break you again." Her lips trembled at the intensity of his words. "You left me once," she said. "You pushed me away. If I open my heart now, do you swear you will not retreat into—" Silence again. He stepped closer. Finally close enough that their hands could brush if either dared. The snow around them muffled the world into perfect stillness. "I swear," he said, voice deep and unguarded. "On my title, on Ravenshaw, on every breath I take, Evelyn, I will never leave you again. Not in fear, not in pride, not in silence. If you ask for my heart, it is yours. If you ask for my patience, it is endless. If you ask me to prove myself 1,000 times, I will." A tear slid down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. He inhaled softly. "All I want is a chance to be the man you once believed me to be." She exhaled shakily, then reached out. Her hand brushed his, lightly, tentatively, but enough to send something powerful and devastating through him. He did not move, not until she intertwined her fingers with his. When she did, his breath broke. They stood like that for several moments, hands joined, heads bowed slightly toward one another, as though admitting defeat to a truth neither could escape. Finally, Evelyn whispered, "I cannot promise you everything at once." He nodded. "I ask only for what you can give." She lifted her eyes to his. "Then I give you this. I am willing to try." His heart clenched so sharply he briefly lost breath. Willing to try. He bowed his forehead to hers, eyes closing, not in triumph, but in reverence. Snow fell around them in a quiet curtain. Her voice came as a whisper against the cold. "Do not make me regret this, Adrian." He cupped her hands between his, warming them gently. "I will spend every day proving you never will." When she finally stepped back, she smiled softly, shy, hopeful, fragile. The kind of smile a woman gives only once she has decided to open a long-guarded door. And as Adrian watched her walk toward Ashbourne Hall, her cloak billowing in the wind, he felt the cold inside him, frozen for so many years, begin to melt. Not by fire, but by her, Evelyn Ashbourne, the only woman he had ever loved, and the only woman he would spend the rest of his life striving to deserve.